Okay. To start with, I'll tell about me. I'm from a place called Chennai. That is from south part of India. It's quite a beautiful place, and it's quite near as well. Just 10,000 miles away from here. And I did my masters in informatics from Nina University, and I did a course from Uppsala University on human-computer interaction. And I work as a senior QA engineer in a team called Car Selection. And I always love to meet and network with a lot of new people, and I'm very fond of meetups. So if you go to your meetups in Gothenburg, there's a high chance that you may meet me there. And during my leisure time, I watch a lot of Netflix and read good books. That's what I love to do in winters. And in summers, I love traveling because I always believe that traveling teaches you a lesson. And I'm also a firm believer that you need to be a person who always want to do something to the society. You need to give back something to the society. And OpenHack provided me with an opportunity to do that. I am a project manager with OpenHack, and it's a non-profit organization that is trying to solve a lot of humanitarian challenges. We conduct a lot of hackathons, coming up with interesting case studies. Like the recent one was about solving water problems, and the participants came up with a good app that can be used in the third world countries to identify where the water is located. And apart from that, I'm also a steering committee member of an association called SAST, that's the Swedish Association of Software Testers. The agenda for today is quite simple. I'll start with what a digital disruption is, and how the second thing will be on SAFE. How SAFE can be quite a good enabler for a digital disruption. And the third thing will be a case study on how Spotify did their scaling. And finally, I'll take the questions. Digital disruption explained. What is digital disruption? Digital disruption is what is happening at a very right moment. Because whenever the technology advances, it actually changes the society we live in, and also the way in which the business is conducted. If you see the picture here, these are the most famous companies that failed to capitalize on the digital disruption. You can see Blockbuster were selling the rentals, and Nokia was quite a good in market with mobiles until the iPhone came up. The iPhones actually changed the way the user buy phones, use the phones. Nokia never thought that iPhone would be a competitor for them. But within the 5 years of iPhone's introduction, Nokia's market was down by 92%. They were completely out of market. The thing to the right, the companies which successfully capitalized on the digital disruption. The Airbnb, or one of the largest hotel chains who own no single hotel, and Spotify has changed the way we listen to music. Domino's has started delivering the pizzas via drones in Australia, and Uber changed the traditional taxi model, and Netflix changed the way we watch the movies, right? So in the digital era, it actually encourages the company who are early starters, and followed by a quick followers. So we always need to be a kind of a company to capitalize on the digital disruption, so that we can be quite a first mover when it comes to the digital disruption. And how it is connected to the SAFE. SAFE can be one of an enabler for achieving this digital disruption, and to sustain and empower our company to be quite sustainable in the digital era. So SAFE is one of the approach to do that. And now we will move on to what SAFE is. Why SAFE? SAFE is a quite popular scaling methodology. It has been proven that most of the companies, especially large organizations, when they want to adapt some kind of a framework, they feel that SAFE is one of the approach they should take. And it has been quite popular in recent times. most of the companies who want to adapt the scaling go for the SAFe methodology. The reason for that is when you implement SAFe, you have at least 30 to 75% increase in your faster time to market, and 10 to 50% increase in employment engagement, 25 to 75% increase in productivity, and 20 to 50% improvements in quality. So SAFe is one of the strongest methodology when you want to do scaling in your company. Nothing beats an agile team, except a team of agile teams. So this is a picture of the SAFe architecture. When you see the picture, this was the expression I got when I first looked at the SAFe framework. It's quite a complex framework, and when my intention was to make it simple for the people to understand. Because yesterday when I was showcasing this presentation to my wife, she listened patiently for 1 hour, and at the end of the presentation, she said she couldn't get what I am saying. Then I asked her, what do you mean by that? She said, I can't get what you're saying. Then I thought, okay, I need to rework on the presentation, and I sat overnight to rework to make it more simple. While doing that, I thought I was actually watching Netflix during the time after the presentation to calm my mind. I was seeing a series called Tiny House Nation. It's a nice series in Netflix. Then I came up with an idea. Okay, let's start with some example on explaining SAFe. And I thought I'll start with an example of building a house. So the project we have now is building a house. Let's see how we can implement SAFe to achieve building a house. So if you see SAFe, there are 4 layers: the team level, program level, solution level, and portfolio level. What I'm going to explain now is how, by using an example of house, how I can explain this breakdown. Let's start with the top layer. It's the portfolio layer, where you start building a house, and that will be kind of an epic. For the people who know what an epic is, let us consider that building a house can be an epic in this case. And then we move on to the capability. The capability in this case could be building a kitchen. There can be several teams working on different parts. One team preliminarily focus on building a kitchen here. And in the third level, let us move on to a feature where building a shelf can be an example. You want to build a kitchen rack, that could be an example where different teams in the program level coordinate and work together to achieve that. And in the team level, it could be building a rack, the smallest component, tiny component. Usually in this case, it's the user story. So that's how every layer is connected. So let's take this example. And what an enabler is? Enablers are usually kind of the architecture that enables or achieves enables you to achieve your epic. In this case, if you take the top layer, the enablers could be the wood, bricks, and tiles, which can help you to build a house. But in our case, we can consider the environment or continuous delivery pipelines as an enabler for achieving our epics. So now we'll go to the first layer. The first layer is called as the team layer. What happens in the team level? In the team layer, we have a preliminary agenda of building a rack. That can be a good user story. In the team, usually comprises of 5 to 9 members. That's what an agile team is. And in the team level, you can either use Scrum or Kanban. There is not a strict regimentary thing that you should go only with the Scrum or Kanban. You can choose either flavor of Scrum or Kanban. So I'm not going to go much detail into what a Scrum is, because most of us are working in this layer and we know what a Scrum is. But for the people who don't know, I'm just going to elaborate in a simpler way. It's usually the product owner prioritizes and picks up from the backlog, and then we go for a sprint planning meeting, and then we go for an iteration for every 2 weeks, and then we have rituals like daily Scrum meeting, review, and then we do a retrospective. The roles in the Scrum are usually the Scrum Master, who is a servant leader who tries to coordinate and achieve the sprint goal, and the product owner who actually decides on what needs to be built, and we have the development team who actually builds them. And moving on to the next layer, this is called as the program layer. And in the program layer, we move on to the next thing of building a shelf, complete shelf. How do you achieve that? To achieve that, every team will start building a rack on their own. Then we try to integrate all the racks together to build a shelf. In this case, building a shelf is a feature. And usually the program level is achieved by means of an agile train. I'm going to explain what an agile train in the coming slide. But the usual program happens for 10 weeks, that is for 5 iterations. And in the 5 iterations, the 4 are development iteration, and the last and the final one is called as the innovation and planning iteration. And there are 2 more objectives that you need to follow when it comes to the program layer. That is develop on cadence and release on demand. What does release on demand mean? Release on demand, most often we confuse the term release and deployment. They are quite intertwined. But we need to move towards a situation where release and deployment are quite separate. Whenever a developer comes with a development, he should have the confidence to put it into the production. And only we will enable it to the end customers at the time of the need. And this can be achieved by a lot of mechanisms like future toggles, green-blue environments, or doc launches, or canary launches. These are several ways of achieving the release on demand. And the next thing is on developing on cadence. So the main problem when it comes to development of cadence is misalignment. What happens? Here you can see a team starts building a bridge, another team starts building a tunnel, and when they try to integrate, that's where they came to know they are building completely 2 different things. So in order to avoid this, SAFe encourages you to develop on cadence. How do you develop and build and integrate using cadence approach? This can be facilitated by means of an agile release train. Okay, I am coming again to our example of building a bookshelf. So let's start with the PA planning. Here our PA objective is to build a bookshelf. To build a bookshelf at the end of 10th week, that is after 5 iterations. That's our main intention. And what could be the enabler and feature here? The enabler is all the racks, the woods, the mica sheets. That could be a kind of an enabler, and the screws and bolts that you need to build the bookshelf. That is a kind of an enabler. And the features are different racks. Let us consider that team 1 will build the top rack, team 2 will build the second top, and team 3 will build the third top. So at the beginning of the iteration, at the beginning of the iteration, you all sit together and decide on what you want to build. So now we have decided you want to build different layers of rack that needs to be integrated at the end of the 10th week to have a complete shelf. So then you start the agile train. Here's where the product manager acts. He picks up all the components that needs to be put into the train based on the priority. He feels that there needs to be 8 racks, and each team has to come up with 2 racks. So that's what the intention is. So he puts all the features and divides the feature among the team based on the team's capability, and then he starts the train. At the end of the 4th week, you need to be sure that the development is complete and it is integrated to have a complete rack. And in the IP iteration, what you do is you do a kind of a demo to see what the situation of the rack is, and then you do a retrospective on what went well and what went wrong. And then you do a planning for building a subsequent rack for the next PA planning. So that's how this PA planning works. And you may ask me the question, where does the architects and the lean UX guys come here? The architects are the person who decides here on the dimensions of the rack and how it should be. But in our case, it could be the technical competence or technical strategical technical things like when it comes to the technical architectures. That's what the architecture decides on. And when it comes to the UX, you want the rack to be more fancy. So you need the UX guys to come up with some nice designs so you can sell the rack to the customers. So that's how you can correlate the UX and the architecture in this PA planning. Next, this is what a typical agile train looks. As I mentioned before, you can have 50 to 125 people working on a single agile train, and it can have from 5 to 12 teams working on the agile. And we have a cadence for 10 weeks, out of which the first 4 weeks, first 4 iterations, that is 8 weeks of development, and the final week is integration, innovation, and planning. And then here you work on a single program backlog that is mainly owned by the product manager, and you work under the guidance of an architecture as well as the UX, and you move towards a common mission, in this case building a shelf. And what are the different art roles? You have a release train engineer, he is like a kind of a chief scrum master, and you have the product manager who owns and decides on what that needs to be built, and you have the system architect who decides on the dimensions of the shelf or the technical architecture, and you have the business owners who actually decides on the value that they want to generate out of this agile release train. And what happens in a PA planning? Here you can see for 2 days every 10 weeks all the people who belong to a single art gather in a single room, and the main recommendation what says is everyone need to be present. For the people who are working in remote, need to be connected via a video conference or a call. And then the product management decides on what are the features they want to prioritize. For example, if the product management decides to build a kitchen, they can say that they want to install a fridge, they want to install a dishwasher, and they want to build racks. That are the different feature priorities which we can have. And what does the development team do? The development team gathers for a breakout time, and they then decide on the story planning and the high level estimates. In this case, for building a shelf, the development team sits together and decide on what the timeline it will be to build a shelf. And the architecture and UX act as an intermediate for governance, interfaces, and to resolve all the dependencies. At the end of the PA planning, everyone needs to vote, and so that everyone agrees on what will be delivered at the end of the 10th week. And this is how a typical program board looks. Here you can see different teams working on the different user stories, and here they decide on what iterations they will work on what story. And the blue ones are the features, in this case building a big shelf, and the red ones have a significant dependency, and the orange ones are the milestone events. That's how a typical program board looks. And this is how a PA planning week looks. For a period of 2 weeks after your development iteration, the first week will be a buffer for doing your leftover work or integrating, and you need to have an innovation that can be done via hackathons or some kind of build whatever you want with whoever you want in whatever way. That can happen during the innovation. And then next you need to get for the next PA planning. And as you can see here, there is an inspect and adapt workshop that will happen on a half a day during the second week. That in that you will analyze on whatever that went well, whatever went wrong, with all members of the art. So all the people in the art sit together and decide on what went well, what went wrong, and then you come up with a plan for the next iteration, and then you come up with a fist of 5 vote on agreeing on what can go for the next PA plan. And the orange ones are marked as a solution train. In case if you have multiple strategies or multiple projects that's going along, then you can have a multiple release trains. For example, one release train can work on building a kitchen, another release train will work on building a hall. Then they need to sync in their level. So they have a separate meeting where all the solution level management and the solution train engineers sit together and resolve and decide on what are the risks are and try to resolve all the dependencies. Now we are moving on to the third level. It's called the solution level. The solution level example, here we speak on terms of terminology is called capability. Building a kitchen is a capability, building a hall is a capability. So, for example, building a kitchen and giving it to your customer is if it is going to be your only motive, then you can have and realize it using a single agile train. But if it's going to be building a hall, building a kitchen, building a bedroom, there you need a different multiple arts facilitating and achieving that. So for that, you need a multiple art or the multiple release train. As I mentioned before, each release train will have a close to 50 to 125 people. So you need to have a multiple release train if you're building a large solution. And the solution roles here are solution train engineer, who is like a chief scrum master, and you have a solution management who decides on the budgeting, who decides on the priorities, on what the solution needs to be, and you have the solution architect who comes up with an entire architecture of designing a kitchen or designing a solution. So these are the levels in the solution. Moving on to the final level, this is called as the portfolio level. And what happens in the portfolio level? Here you have a preliminary objective. The portfolio is to build a house. And you have several portfolio roles. The epic owner, who builds who owns the epic for building a house. And you have a lead portfolio management, who are the preliminary responsibility to have the strategic investment decisions on what needs to be built and how much investment will be made for the kitchen, for a hall, or for a bedroom. So they decide on what needs to be done, and they also decide on and take care of the regulations, and they need to ensure that they adhere to the regulations. And the enterprise architect is like a chief architect for the entire house, for the entire portfolio. So he decides on how the entire structure of the house needs to be. So he is called as the enterprise architect. And when it comes to the lean budgeting, think of in terms of money, how does a financial control can be emphasized on this level, and it's the portfolio management who decides on the budgets. And you have the value stream. The value stream can be realized via agile release trains, and this is preliminary on what resources have to work on what part, and you have to fund the people. And the portfolio Kanban, you need to ensure that your demand is actually matched to the value, because you can't start building a house and then you decide on building, then you can't decide on building a mansion just for changing the requirement or just because someone asked for a mansion. So you always need to stick to what your capacity is and try to deliver according to that. And when it comes to the portfolio canvas, the portfolio value streams and the solution needs to be adhering to the goal. And in our case, it needs to be adhering to a goal of building a house. And this is what an Volvo Cars Agile framework is. The framework is actually kind of a tool, and it's like a stuff, whatever you want to use, you can pick that tool and adapt it to you. So that's how Volvo Cars has adapted the SAFe framework to their adaptability. And let's see on how they have done. I'm not going to go detail into it, because as you can see here, the PAM is called as a procurement art manager, and MAL is called as the manufacturer art leader, and PSM is kind of an procurement solution manager. So they have defined their roles according to their hardware capabilities. But since we have more of a software, it's not that we need to go along with that. Probably we can refine and adapt our framework to software. And next comes on how do you prioritize an epic for an optimal ROI. So this is a very interesting thing, because whenever the product manager has a task of building something, you usually has a lot of things to prioritize. He can't decide on what provides a value to the customer. For example, in this typical case, these are the three features which we can take, and the product manager has to prioritize on what needs to be delivered. For example, in my case, I could tell my wife wants a fridge, because she feels that has a more priority, because she does not need to cook, she can buy and store everything in the fridge. But in my case, I feel that the stove would be quite important, because I love to cook. Then there's the oven. Then how do you prioritize on what needs to be delivered? For example, in the case of the fridge, there is a term called cost of delay. What is the cost of delay? The cost of delay is actually calculated using business value, time criticality, and risk reduction. When it comes to the customer, for example, what is the business value? The business value is that a customer may like a Samsung fridge, and or he can prefer a Samsung fridge over an LG fridge. So we need to understand what this business value is and what is the time criticality. He wants his kitchen to be done in 2 weeks, and if you're going to take 2 months, they will be quite unhappy. We need to understand what the time criticality is and what is the risk reduction or opportunity enablement. What happens if you build just a kitchen for your customers? They are happy with the way you have built a kitchen for them. They suggest that you build a kitchen for their friends, or they refer you to their friends. That is an opportunity enablement. So the cumulative score of this is the cost of delay, or the priority in which you need to deliver things. And the job duration is the time for you to deliver the things. For example, in the case of this, the fridge is the most important customer value. In my case, it takes 13 points, or 13 is the score, or for the highest priority, and this is what it takes for delivering a fridge. And the job duration is 8. For example, you are ordering a fridge from an external vendor. It takes 8 days for it to come. Then you have a dependency for the fridge to be delivered to your customer. And in the case of a stove, you have a priority of 8 points, and the duration is 2 days. In the case of oven, it's 2 points, and the job duration is 1 day. What you need to do is, there is a term called weighted short job first. You need to calculate the delay by the duration. In this case, the fridge, if you calculate the score, its average score is 1.62, and in the case of stove, its score is 4. So you need to go with the score of 4, and you need to go by prioritizing, by delivering a stove to the customer that can be optimal for both the customer as well as for us. So that's how you need to decide when you decide on the priority on what feature needs to be delivered every time when you go for a PI planning. And this can be done on all levels, from the portfolio large solution as well as in the program level. Next is the sunk cost. Sunk cost is a very interesting concept. I can explain what a sunk cost does mean by a simple example. Let us say that you want to go for a movie, and you say, let us assume that you want to go and see a movie called Joker, and you try to book tickets for that, but you did not get the tickets for it. Then you decide, okay, I will go on watching some other movie because I don't want to sit at home. Then you pay 100 crores, buy a ticket for the second movie, you go to the theater. Then you have a friend there coming to you and saying that he has got an extra ticket for the Joker, and he asks you whether you want to join. What will you do? Most people, what they do is, they don't prefer the first choice. They go with the second choice because they believe that they have already paid or spent 100 kronas on a movie, so they want to go with that one. But the problem here is, they end up watching the movie they don't want to watch, but still, for the sake, because they have spent 100 kronas on it. So that's what is called as a sunk cost. Your previous investment should not affect the future decisions. That's what happens with most of the projects. When they start a 100 million project, and then they experience a problem, then they come to a conclusion that this project cannot be delivered, or this project will not be useful to the customer. But still they want to continue doing that, just because they have invested $100 million in that. So every time a project needs to be decided, they have to consider or ignore the sunk cost. Your past investment should never affect your future decision. In that case, in the second case, what you do is, you spend 100 kronas on watching a movie, and also you have to sit through the 2 hours to watch a movie that you don't want to watch. So you have to experience double pay. So that's what sunk cost means. And moving on to the next thing, how do the roles sync? I have actually color coded on how the different roles sync. You can see that there are different levels: the team level, the art level, the solution level, and you have the portfolio level. All the roles that are color coded in yellow can sync together, and they have a kind of a meeting called the engineering meeting, or a train meeting, where all the Scrum Master, release train engineer, solution train engineer meet together to decide on what can be done for a particular release or a particular PA. And at the second level, it's the product owner, product management, and the solution management. They sit together and discuss on what needs to be the important priority or that needs to be delivered. And the third level is where the system architect, solution, and enterprise architect, they interact with each other to understand how can we enable a technical architecture to facilitate the delivery of such epics and stories. So that's how a different art level syncs, different roles sync. And altogether, there's a team meeting called as an art sync, where all the Scrum Master, release train engineer, product management, and product owner sits together along with the technical architect to see how we can facilitate or bring out a story to value after a particular period. So that's how the different roles sync. And the third part of my presentation is about how Spotify did their scaling and what kind of benefits they achieved out of scaling. Frameworks, as I mentioned, the SAFe, are like a toolboxes. You need to pick up the tools you want and start using it. You don't have to pick up the tool or adapt just because you have a framework. You need not adapt the entire framework to your organization. You always need to pick and choose what you need, what will work for you, and use the tools. So frameworks are always like a toolboxes. This is what a typical waterfall architecture works. Before, what happened is we always think that this is what our customer wants, and we define a particular timeline, and we start delivering towards that timeline. But we are never aware of what will come along the way. In this case, it's like a cannonball where you try to hit your target, but the problem here is you never know there is going to be something that is coming in between your targets, or you never know that your target could move or your customer expectations can move. So this is called as a predictive process. That's what happened a few years ago in the waterfall model. What Spotify tried to achieve is adaptive process. The customer discovers what they need, and the team also discovers how to deliver it. The only thing is they are aware of what may come in between. Even though they are not aware of what will come in between, they try to adapt to hit the target. So the Spotify wanted their process to be more missile instead of like a cannonball, so that they can be adaptive to deliver what they intend to deliver. Next comes a very important concept called as a minimum viable product. You should always focus on delivering value to the customer. In the first case, you can see here, the customer, in order to deliver value to the customer, you just pick up all the bricks that come along your way, load it in a truck, and you feel that you have delivered the outcome. But the problem here is you always need to ensure that you want to pick up only the value or pick up only the features that gives value to you and value to the customers. And how can you do that? You need to prioritize. So the weighted short job first could be one technique to prioritize on what value that you can deliver to the customer. So always you need to focus on value instead of focusing on the efforts. That is what is explained in the first slide. And in the second slide, you always need to ensure that you want to ship a minimum viable product. In the first case, in the first iteration of building a car, you can't just build a wheel because that will not be useful to anyone. In the second, consider the bottom slide where you can see that you can come up with something more minimal that can provide value to the customers. In the bottom slide, you can see that a slider can provide a value because it can help the customer to transport. So whenever you are building a product, you always need to consider that it needs to have the minimum viability. More important than the viability, it needs to be more lovable aspect. That's what the customer in today's disruptive era or a digital disruptive era expects. We want the products, whatever you are going to deliver, that needs to be lovable by the customer. So it's not only the viability that is more important here, it's also how lovable your products are. So that can actually help you to retain your customers. When I started with when I started with this presentation, I always had this goal that it should be a minimum understandable presentation. That's what the goal I had in my mind. then what I did was I started showcasing this presentation to a few of my friends, my wife, and few people here to get a feedback. Then I revisited and reiterated to make things simpler so people can understand. So that's how the approach we need to follow. We always need to follow an approach where we iterate smaller, deliver the value to the customer, and then analyze the value that you have delivered to the customer, and based on that you have to refine and make new things that are lovable by the customer. That's how the process needs to work. And here comes an important topic on continuous integrations. Whenever your release is seldom, the problem here is the release becomes quite big. If you're going to deploy only once a month, the release becomes quite big, and the release becomes hard because you never know what will break in the production. When the release is hard, it's like a cycle that you don't want to release very often because you feel the release is hard. You don't want to do it often. So it's like a vicious cycle that goes on and on. So what Spotify did is they want to release often. They want to release often means the release is very small, because if you're going to do it every 2 weeks or every week, the release is going to be small, and you're very sure that the thing works in the production, and the release process is going to be simple. And when the release is simple, you always have the habit of releasing often. So that's the cycle. Spotify was able to achieve this because initially they had a monolithic architecture, and then they decoupled their architecture to facilitate to release simple. So that actually helped them to scale further. And in the second slide, here you can see here, whenever you have an idea, you can come up with a minimum prototype, and then they build a minimum viable product out of it. And when they build a minimum viable product, they deploy it only to a certain percentage of the users, analyze the data, and when they analyze the data, they tweak the data to see what can be changed, and then they again deploy that to production to see what the analysis is. This is the cycle that Spotify followed so that they can deliver a good viable product to the customer always. And the next slide is to show how you need to fail faster, because you can't achieve something without failing, right? So in order to fail, you always need to be that you should be the person who should fail first, so that you can learn faster and adapt it. In the case of the first slide, you can see here that failure recovery is more important than failure avoidance. It's like keeping a baby in the crib. If you're going to keep the baby in the crib, the baby is never going to come out of the crib. They're just used to cry, and they're never going to learn anything. And at the end of several years, you feel that the baby hasn't learned anything. But in the second case, if you let the baby out, then the baby will start feeling happy. It's going to do all naughty things, get hurt, but the baby also heals faster. So in this case, the failure recovery is more important, and at the end of some time, you can see that the baby has learned a lot of things which the baby in the crib won't learn. So always we need to have this kind of a culture where failure recovery is more important than failure avoidance. And the next thing is about improving. We are always busy in doing our own things, our own day-to-day things, that we don't have time to sit back and think on what we need to do. This picture typically depicts that the man trying to cut the tree with the axe, even though there is another idea from a team member who has an electronic axe in his hand, which can help things easier. But this man has never have any time to listen to what the other man says. So the communication is a key goal, and also you need to have kind of a slack to rethink on what you are doing. That can actually help you to innovate and move faster. And the next important thing is productivity. What is productivity? Productivity is a multiplication of this equation. It's based on the effort, because you need some kind of an effort to have a productivity, and you need to have a competence, because in order to deliver some kind of a competence, you need to have, in order to deliver something, you need to have the competence to do that. And the third thing is about the environment. The environment should facilitate to achieve your productivity. But the most important thing is the motivation. That's why I have squared the motivation here, because without the motivation, even though you have the effort, competence, and environment, you can't deliver a good product. Motivation is a very important thing that can help you to innovate and compete with your competitors. So always we need to ensure that our culture has a kind of a motivation to deliver what we intend to do that can actually increase the productivity, that can actually result in bringing a minimum viable product to the customer and can increase the customer satisfaction. So the main motto here is you need to fail fast to succeed even faster. Next is some examples on what Spotify did. Here you should never be ashamed of your failures. Whenever you did something or whenever you did a mistake, you should be proud to display them. Because whenever you start punishing for your failures, punishing someone for your failures, then what they do is they don't let you know the next time when the failure happens, right? So the culture that Spotify had was displaying their failures proudly in a wall, what went wrong and what could change, and this served as a lesson for them to improve. And the next is every team had a kind of a definition of awesome. So for example, a particular team had they don't want to break anything in the production. That was kind of the kind of an objective they had there in the definition of awesome. So each team needs to have kind of a definition of awesome on what they on the target they need to move to. So the paywall can be quite an interesting concept here. And whenever there is a P1 or a P2 that occurs in the Spotify, the people relevant to the P1 all gather in a room. They don't blame anyone for the result of the P1, but what they instead do is they just sit and discuss on why the P1 happened and how can they do things to make sure that it did not happen again. So that's what the culture that Spotify had. So always be proud to display your failures and always be ready to help your teammates. And this can be one of an example of how to have a continuous improvement in your team. You can have a kind of a board where you can have an improvement team where you discuss on different problems, where you can put it in the first quadrant on what problem you want to achieve. What problem is there and how do you want to solve it? That can be put in the first quadrant. The next can be a target condition on when you want to solve the problem. And the third thing can be a definition of awesome. And the first steps can be illustrated in the final quadrant. For example, I can say an example from our test team. We have a target to have a complete automation so that whenever a developer wants to deploy a single line of code, he should not worry or he should not have something on his mind before deploying that whether it will go well or not. So always ensure that there is 100% coverage on all the tests that can give a confidence to the developer to deploy in the production. So that's what the intention we have. We need to have a 100% automated test. That's kind of a goal for definition of awesome. And what will be the next target condition? The target condition from 6 weeks from now is at least have a base framework ready, covering at least 70% of test cases that is automated. That could be our target condition. So whenever you want to improve something, you can have a kind of board like this in your team and try to move towards the target condition. And this is basically based out of Toyota's kata, where you set a target condition, and when you have achieved the target condition, then you set the next target condition and move towards that. It's like moving towards the North Star. And the next is about the experiment-friendly culture. Everywhere, you need to have an experiment-friendly culture. It's always the experiments that beats the arguments. When you and your teammates have kind of an argument, always try to do both. For example, your teammate says they want to do A and you want to do B. Just do both and see what the result is and make your decision based on the result. So this is not only on the team level but on the product level as well. Whenever you think that you have a few features that you want to deploy to the customer, ensure that you do a kind of an A/B testing. Recently, in our build and price team, we did a A/B testing for our car selection by changing the continue button. What we did is we rolled out to a few markets. Just 50% of user will see a particular page for the trims, and the rest of the users will see the other pages for the trade. And then we analyzed on the data on how which page had more response, and based on the data, then we decided that what should the approach be. So that's how the experiment friendly culture should be. You always need to try different things based on the data, and the decision you make should always be based on the data. So moving on to the next slide, it's about the aligned autonomy. Here you can see that whenever you're going to have a low autonomy and a low alignment, it's like a kind of a micromanaging. And in the second quadrant, if you see, it's going to be high autonomy and low alignment. In this case, the management or the solution level does not know what the problem you're working on. They just think that someone is working on the problem. But if you go to the next level, where there's a high alignment and low autonomy, here you can see that the leader gives a vision that we need to cross the river, but the leader also says that you need to build a bridge to cross the river. That can be quite authoritative sometimes. But the final quadrant, where you have a high autonomy and a high alignment, it's like that the leader gives you a direction that we need to just cross the river, and he asks you to figure out how. So leader should be in a position to say or describe a problem and tell why the problem occurs. But it should be the team who need to collaborate and communicate with each other to think of a solution of building a bridge to solve the problem. So alignment actually enables autonomy. This is also one of the important aspects that Spotify had it in their culture. So I'm just going to wrap up now, and this is going to be my final slide. Culture beats process. Even though you have a lot of framework, even though you have a lot of scaled agile methodologies, it's always the culture that is more important than any framework. What is the culture? Culture is the stuff that people do without noticing it. That's what a culture means. So you are the culture. So if you want to begin with something, you start doing that, and it can create a ripple effect, and it can change the entire organization. So you can model the behavior you want to see, but the change must begin within you. And I would also like to conclude by saying a very important point on a very important attribute that everyone must learn in their life. It's based out of my own experiences as well. The important attribute that everyone needs to learn is helping each other. That's the most important life skill that everyone needs to learn, because this is a very competitive world, and our competition is really high. If you want to move further, you always need to help each other. You should never be ashamed to ask help from anyone if you don't know something, and you should never be ready. You should always be ready to offer help to someone. That's what the culture we need to build in this organization, because helping each other can actually help us to move further. Because most of the times you will be surprised to see a lot of people will be ready to help you if you ask for help. But provided you should also be in a position to take care of them first, this will happen. So always ensure that you help each other. And I like to conclude by saying, help each other, and then you can grow together. Thank you. Thank you for your time.